Hey guys, so this is part 3 of my 3-part Elemental Shaman guide, and in this part we're going to be talking about gearing, that being like stat ratios, azerite traits, maybe looking at a little bit of trinkets or something, things like that. So first thing first, let's take a look at the stat ratios. So to those of you who have been around a while, you probably know what stat ratios are, but to the rest of you, stat ratios are a way of measuring what your best stat distribution should be. And these numbers here are not stat weights. Stat weights would have intellect involved, and then the rest would just be showing the power in comparison to intellect, but a stat ratio is only looking at secondary stats. There is no intellect involved in this at all. So for example, with these current secondary stat distributions, we have 0.5 crit, 0.3 haste, 0.1 mastery, and 0.1 verse. Translating this to real numbers, if you had 1,000 total secondary stats, you would want 500 of it to be crit, 300 of it to be haste, 100 mastery, 100 verse, making 1,000 total. It's basically just showing the ratio of what your stats should be. So hopefully you can understand that. If you don't, you can go to the website and it goes a little more in depth about what it actually means and how it's made. But basic stat ratio here is single target, 0.5 crit, 0.3 haste, 0.1 mastery, and 0.1 verse. Dungeons at Mythic Plus or AoE, 0.6 crit, 0.2 haste, and 0.1 of the rest. It's really nice that our crit and haste, or specifically crit, is pretty much the same for single target and AoE, but this is really similar to our previous stat ratio in 8.1, or in 8.0 rather. You just switch the crit and haste, so you should have enough gear to be able to easily switch over to this, which is really convenient. And it's also the same for single target and AoE, which is also really convenient. But on the topic of stat ratios, let's take a look at consumables. For the flask, you want the intellect one, of course. For food, you can go with the feast, which is almost certainly going to be the best one in total, overall. But if you do not have access to a feast, you can also go with crit or the haste one. Potion of intellect, not using the bursting potion. Rune is pretty obvious, it's only level 121. Enchant. To ring enchant, you can either go with crit or haste or whatever going. Try to match your stat ratio the best you can. Same with the weapon enchant, whichever one you have that is out of proportion. Or if you want a particular stat to be part of your reorigination array, you can go with that as well. This is the best way to do this, of course, is going to be simming, but if you don't want to sim, you can just go with the ratios. And then one thing to note about gems is there is an intellect gem, but it gives the same amount of intellect as it would if it was a crit gem. Or rather, it gives the same number of intellect as a crit gem gives of crit. So in some people, the higher eye level you are, the more this seems to be a thing. But for me, keep in mind the sim does not have reorigination array enabled because it was a dungeon sim, or Patrick sim with dungeon talents on, dungeon traits on. Okay, I got the right word now. And as you can see here, intellect is a decent bit below crit and haste. So for me, I wouldn't want an intellect gem. I'd want a haste or crit gem depending on which stat I wanted the most. Probably crit gem for me, but yeah, this keep in mind. Most people will probably want an intellect gem, so it is still suggested on the website that you get an intellect gem, but make sure to sim yourself and double check whether you actually want that or not, because for some people, the higher level you are, the more likely. For some people, you do not actually want the intellect gem, you want another secondary stat gem. Now let's take a look at the azerite traits. So all of this information is going to be coming from bloodmallet.com, so keep that in mind. If you want to check some of it on your own, you can go to any class or spec you want. Azerite gear here. Now, plus 10 array means reorigination array, so that'd be your first archive. If you had 10 stacks, then this is 5 stacks. So this is not just archive being number 1, it's only being number 1 if you're getting the array from it. And the next best trait is Echo of the Elementals. Very big outlier right now. It's quite significantly ahead of the competition. So if you can get access to Echo of the Elementals, ideally you'd want 2 of these. They do stack. They don't increase the duration. You're only going to see 1 elemental still, but it does twice as much damage. So ideally you have 1 archive to get yourself the array, and then you have 2 Echo of the Elementals as well for raiding. For dungeons, that can change a bit, but first we're going to look at some other options. You can go Blightborn Infusion, which is a pretty good one as well. Very versatile for single target and AoE. Dagger in the Back is one of the ones I don't really like personally, because you have to be behind the target in order to maximize its effect, and it also doesn't really benefit AoE at all. At least not any more than it would benefit one target. Swirling Sand, another crit proc. pretty good for AoE as well, so another nice thing to have here. Champions of Azeroth, just a basic stat increase. I don't really think there's much places to get this, though. Archive is actually pretty good, even if it's a second archive. Go all the way down here, you got Sign-Up Shocks, Natural Harmony. Natural Harmony is pretty much middle of the pack now. Natural Harmony is pretty good for AoE, though, so we're going to look at that in a minute. Ancestral Resonance has been changed, as you may know, but it is still not very good, so I would not recommend going with this trait unless there's like a 1-minute burst window or something you want lust during. Because Mastery is just not very good, so the proc isn't really doing all that much. And some of these new traits are kind of weird. Most of this is just sim error, but... Moving on to Hectic Ad Cleave, as you can see, Natural Harmony, very good up here. Leech Matrix, even 5RA, is not very good on AoE, apparently. Natural Harmony is a really nice trait for doing AoE, because it is also decent on single target, and then it's really good on AoE, so it benefits you all around. It's a nice overall beneficial trait you got. And of course, like we mentioned before, Blightborn Infusion, also a very good overall trait. Does really good for single target, really good for AoE. Willing Sands as well. I think Echo of the Elementals is still pretty high on AoE, even though it's strictly a single target trait. It's just that powerful. So if you have Echo of the Elementals, it's still pretty good even in dungeons and stuff. As long as you're using your elemental as much as you can. As long as you don't have fights that are not going to get the Spark Elemental duration, because it lasts 30 seconds after your elemental expires. Now, Tectonic Thunder is the new trait a lot of people have been asking about. This one is a bit interesting because it really isn't that great, and it doesn't benefit the single target at all. So overall, it is not a very good trait. But it is really... It's pretty good for pure AoE, and the more targets the better. So if you had like 10 target pulls or something, this could do a lot of damage during those pulls. And is also worth noting, if you do have 3 of these for some reason, for like Mythic Plus or something, it is actually worth dropping Earthquake on 1 target, so keep that in mind. And also be careful doing that, because if the boss moves out of the Earthquake, of course you're going to lose a lot of your damage, and it will no longer be worth it. But if you do have 3 of these, Earthquake single target makes a comeback. So there are some little disclaimers, one of those being the one I just said on the site that we can talk about. So Natural Harmony, this is actually inaccurate right now. This is why I want to delay the video, because you never know what's going to be updated for like that first week, as we're still kind of learning and figuring out different things and trying things based on what we think might be wrong. So this ended up being something that changed in 8.1. This is how it was, but in 8.0 this is how it was. But in 8.1, it's no longer worth using Frost Shock to maintain the buff with Natural Harmony, even if you have 3. Lightning Bolt is just too powerful now to be worth losing 1 for the Frost Shock. If you do have Elemental Blast, it definitely improved, or if you do have Natural Harmonies, it's definitely improved with it. Definitely improves Elemental Blast, because you do proc all 3 of the buffs every time you use it. But this improvement is not enough to really be worth using, so I would still avoid Elemental Blast as much as you can. I'm having trouble pronouncing things today. But just worth noting that Natural Harmony is also decent for movement, because you do get to Frost Shock on the move, and you get that sweet buff. But it is not worth Frost Shocking otherwise. Lava Shock is a bit underrated on Sims, because you generally don't get to benefit from it fully. If you have 2 to 3 targets, specifically if they're spread out, so you Flame Shock them, you don't get to Earthquake though, you get pretty good stuff from Lava Shock. So if you like a council fight, Lava Shock could be solid, especially if you're trying to funnel that damage into 1 target. Igneous Potential, unfortunately, if you take a look back over here, Igneous Potential, AoE one? Yeah. Even on Patrick, Igneous Potential is not so hot anymore, because Lightning Bolt is doing a lot more damage than Lava Burst in proportion to how it was in 8.0. So we no longer really want Igneous Potential that much. And if you happen to have 1, keep in mind the second one is a decent bit weaker than the first one. It's not huge, but the first one gives you the buff to the Lava Surge proc, and the second one does not increase that anymore. So just keep in mind, Igneous Potential used to be really good, but it's no longer very good, so you may want to avoid it now. So as you may have guessed, the trinkets are also from Blood Mallet's website. But I wanted to take a quick look at the trinkets. Of course, with all of the things in this video, simming is the best way to figure out what's better for your personalized character. This is kind of more of a guideline. If you don't feel like simming and you just want to know if you should roll on an item or something, you can go check this website, or you can remember from the video or whatever. But trinkets to be on the lookout for: Ignition Mage's Fuse. is really good for pretty much everything. It's really good for AoE, it's really good for single target. I highly enjoy having good on-use trinkets because you can customize when they happen. You don't get procs at bad times. So on-use trinket, very high simming, definitely something you want to go try to achieve, try to acquire if you are able to. But unfortunately, with the way Mythic Plus works right now, the best way to get it would be from the Mythic Plus cache or just spamming Toldagors. But the only way to really get a high one is from a cache, unless you get really lucky. So good luck to you on this one. I got it on one of my healers. Very unlucky there. This one's a World Quest trinket, so you probably won't be able to get that. Some of this stuff can be a little misleading because, not really misleading, but deceiving because you see it at the top, but it's only competing with the other trinkets because, or rather, if it had a high eye level, which you're very, very unlikely to get this at very high eye level, so keep that in mind when you're looking at some of this stuff. Like this World Boss trinket is normally 355. Very unlikely you're going to get it at 385, which is when it would compete with the other stuff. Blaze Shocks, you can try to buy one at 385 or something, but that'd be very hard to do. Blaze Shocks is actually simming pretty high now, so that's cool. And then we got things like Conch that were not that great before, that are actually really good now because of how much we like crit. Our desire to have crit has gone up significantly, so trinkets with crit procs and things like that, like all these crit procs down here, crit and main stat proc, they've all risen up quite a bit. Voodoo Doll, things like the Voodoo Doll is something that you have to keep in mind is only for single target. Just as a general guideline, you gotta analyze your trinkets, and if it's single target damage, on things like AoE, if you had a medallion, this is my comparison because this is exactly what I have. Rot crusted Voodoo Doll, that was way too hard for me, would be like technically the better option on a pure single target boss. But if you're doing something like Zekvaz, you're going to get more damage from the versatility because you can also use that when you're AoEing or cleaving, and it would benefit you in both. So that's another thing with on-use trinkets is, I guess, yeah, also proc trinkets. The ones that deal just single target damage are almost always going to be worse than ones that give you stats. Stats are just overall. There's never a situation where a stat isn't good. So things like that are also good to keep in mind. But generally, you can kind of just sim and find out what's better from that. For Mythic Plus in particular, you tend to favor having at least one on-use trinket, so you can use it with burst, and favor trinkets that also benefit AoE. But if you want to see this list, make sure to check out bloodmallet.com. I'll have that in the description, and you can check every class and spec that you want. Alright guys, that is it for this one. Thank you for watching my extra long series of guides this time around. I wanted to put a little more detail into them and just split it up and do as much information as I possibly could without overloading people. I don't know. I did my best, but it seems like you guys like it so far, so I appreciate all the support on that. And thanks again for watching, guys. Subscribe if you want to see more. Like the video if you liked it. And, oh, one more thing. Next video coming up is going to be another old year talent suggestion thing, so be on the lookout for that. But anyways, guys, I will see you guys next time.